With Arizona Senator John McCain battling brain cancer, a lot of people want to know who gets to fill a vacancy in the U.S. Senate, Arizona voters or the governor? Team 12's Bram Resnick is verifying it for us tonight. Bram?
Yeah, this is a question that hasn't come up in Arizona, and it has national implications. We've learned the Arizona Attorney General's office is reviewing the law and advising the Secretary of State's office in case Senator McCain leaves office. We verified there are at least two possible answers to the question of who fills a vacancy, because there are two different election deadlines.
It's a sensitive personal question, but also an important political one. If Senator John McCain leaves the U.S. Senate in the next few months, would Arizona voters elect a successor in November, or would Governor Doug Ducey make that decision?
And I don't remember this ever happening in all the years I've been involved.
There's already one statewide election for the Senate in the fall to replace the retiring Jeff Flake. A second election for an Arizona Senate seat could determine which political party controls the U.S. Senate. There are two possible deadlines for determining whether voters or the governor fill a Senate vacancy. The first potential deadline, favoring voters, is May 30th. That's the filing deadline to get on the fall ballot. That deadline is based in part on Arizona law. The vacancy shall be filled at the next general election. That would be in November. May 30th is the widely assumed deadline. But prominent election law attorney Joe Canfield disagrees.
At least 120 days before the date of the regular primary election, and by my calculation that would have been on April 30th.
Canfield says state law required Secretary of State Michelle Reagan to inform the counties by April 30th which offices will be up for election. Canfield says that means it's too late to hold a fall election for a vacant Senate seat.
The U.S. Senate, it comes right from the 17th Amendment of the United States Constitution. That office is filled by the governor.
We verified there are two possible deadlines for filling a vacant Arizona Senate seat: April 30th by the governor or May 30th by voters.
So one potential deadline favoring the governor passed 2 days ago. The other one favoring voters is 4 weeks away. Which one will it be? Attorney General Mark Brnovich's office is reviewing the law. Now, whatever he decides could result in a lawsuit. Bram Resnick, 12 News.
Bram, thanks. Developing